Welcome everybody. Today we are here to talk about some fun for the whole family. We'll be discussing the Auto Grader tool for Civil 3D from CAD Technology Center, or CTC for short. My name is Kyle Groves. I am an EIT and a senior technical specialist with ATG USA, and I'm extremely excited to be talking about today's topic with you all. So thank you for your time. So I'm going to go ahead and plan on this being about a medium length webinar, about 45 minutes plus or minus, but going to have some stuff here for everybody. So for our overview of the day, we're going to first, as I usually do, talk about the problem. So we're going to talk about what's wrong with our current grading workflows, as awesome as they can be, available to us inside Civil 3D using the out-of-the-box or as-installed environment. Talk for a little while about the Auto Grader tool from CTC and why we think it's so awesome and so helpful for your projects. I'm going to go through, I'm going to demonstrate two workflows. First, we'll be talking about a site project, a couple of things that we need to know about doing that. And then we're also going to be talking about a workflow for doing subdivision work too. So depending on what it is you're up to at your daily life, I should have a little bit of something here for everybody. Well, some general best practices that I think we should all be aware of. So first off, let's talk about Civil 3D and our project grading as available to us with these out-of-the-box workflows. So first of all, feature lines are wonderful. Civil 3D has been out for a really long time. It's happening less often, but I'm really disappointed or just kind of sad for firms where I hear, oh yeah, we're doing polyline grading for our surfaces. Because life gets so much better once you understand what the tools of feature lines can do. A couple of things to know about how you should use them. Your proposed grading workflows can be so much faster, so much more dynamic, and really a lot more intuitive than doing some of the old paper hand grading methods. However, relating these feature lines to each other can be pretty tricky. So a couple of the problems with this is that manual stepped offsets do work very well, but they're not dynamic to each other. So as we'll talk about in our site grading workflow, what happens when we change our overall drainage behavior, and now we have to change our gutter line, and which means we have to change our top face, our top back, so on and so forth. You got to go through, you got to do that every single time. There's two settings that are related to feature lines that are just really not widely understood by the user base. First off is the style hierarchy. We'll definitely go over that today. And just how sites work in general, so we can make sure feature lines are or are not talking to each other whenever they cross. And for those of us that can say, but Kyle, we have a dynamic option inside Civil 3D. We've got the grading object. Yes, we do. And there's some better practices to use with these, but overall, the user base as a whole, from my experience, seems to think that they're not very stable and they leave a lot to be desired. So talking about all of these fundamentals with feature lines, I do just want to do a quick shameless self-promotion. Back in November of 2019, last year at AU, I did teach a class called Feature Lines, Best Practices and Intuitive Site Design Workflows. I'm going to cover a few of these elements today, but if you like what I'm talking about and you want to know more, go check that out. Just search my name, Kyle Groves, into the Autodesk University website, and it should pop up. I was pretty happy to get a 4.66 out of 5 for my review on that. And lastly, with our Civil 3D tools available to us, when we're starting to talk about subdivision workflows, Civil 3D gives us a lot of really great tools for designing the roadway and getting to the right of way. But once we start getting into the actual lot grading, it's pretty tricky. And there can be a lot of manual iterations, kind of like I was talking about with those manual stepped offsets. So this is the problem. Now let's talk about our solution, which today I'm going to be promoting a lot, the Auto Grader toolset for all of this feature line management. So what is Auto Grader in the first place? Well, at the heart of the matter, what we're doing is we're being proactive about solving the right triangle. So what I mean by this is we're starting with some sort of known feature, and then we're offsetting it up, down, left, right. We may be interested in a couple of different parameters, but ultimately we're solving a right triangle. So we can specify some combination of delta x, delta z, and delta, or in a slope, or maybe we're going to go until we find a surface. So whatever it is, we're going to be proactive about setting that up ahead of time. The tool is going to create multiple feature lines in one operation, and they're going to be related to each other. Also, we have the ability to save and load these templates of solving the right triangle for a later use. So if I'm always going to be using the same geometry of a curb or the same typical geometry for a detention basin, I don't have to re-step offset those for every unique project. I can just load that in the next time I need to execute on that particular piece of geometry. So that's what AutoGrader does, but let's talk a little bit before we get into software about how to use AutoGrader. So AutoGrader is going to give us an opportunity to do dynamic grading by linking feature lines. We're going to define these parameters using the term grading family. And yes, for anyone who is familiar with Revit, that is a specific nod to how families work in Revit for all of those parametric designs. So when we set up these grading families, we're going to solve that right triangle. So I've got a variety of different methods, distances, slopes, elevations that I get to prescribe for all of that. And then as my design change is throughout my project, I'll just have an opportunity to either run a specific grading family or multiple grading families. And that's how I'm going to refresh this series of changes throughout my drawing. AutoGrader also does have an opportunity to automatically add these feature lines to our surface as a break line. We can be proactive, again, about our supplementing factors, our weeding factors, things like that. And then we also get to manage all of our styling and layering considerations when we are creating these new feature lines as part of our design. So I'm not going to get into all of the different ways that we can use this tool because they're almost infinite. But go over a couple of those basics today when I actually get inside the software in a few minutes. So with AutoGrader, okay, cool, we can create grading families, we can manage all this stuff, but we're actually going to apply this grading family concept for two main types of applications in the current release. The first off is a parallel grading scenario. And this is pretty straightforward for anyone who's used to working on site grading projects. We're just going to have some sort of a master feature line, and then we'll be doing that stepped offset command to create something like a curb situation. Maybe we want to predefine how our detention basins are going to behave, either using our high water level or our normal water level as that starting point. The other main application that we're going to be able to take advantage of is a perpendicular grading family. So the example I'll be using today is going to be a subdivision workflow. We'll be starting with some known or with some already defined elevations off of a feature line representing our right-of-way. And then we'll talk about a couple of different ways that we can go through and actually grade these lots. And I'll go ahead and I'll give you the overall workflow. We'll see the nuances between the perpendicular versus the parallel inside the software, which is 2 slides from now. But our overall workflow is that we are going to first create from scratch, or we can load in a grading family from these outside locations. Then what we're going to do is we're going to choose a master feature line or a parent feature line. So this does have to be defined as a feature line in the software already, and it should have grades that we like as that starting point. And from there, when we're actually choosing that, we have got a couple of different options. We can either manually select individual feature lines, or we can use a filter to include or exclude based on all sorts of different criteria for that feature line. Just like the native grading object toolset, we can run these offsets, or we can run these children feature lines along the range of the entire object, or we can do it from a station range. So just a narrow section where we want to be doing this offsetting or this perpendicular creation from. After we have that master parent feature line, we're going to define all of the other child feature lines that are going to be based off of all of that. Again, what we're doing here is we're just adding various elements that are going to ask us, how do we want to solve this right triangle or series of right triangles? And it is important that we have a couple of different options for choosing our attachment point, direction, left, right, inside, outside, so on and so forth. And then lastly, the tool does have the opportunity to go ahead and add these feature lines to our surface. So we're going to want to be proactive about determining what surface these get added to. We'll have an opportunity to define supplementing as well as weeding factors for that. So enough PowerPoint. Let's go ahead and hop inside the software. So I am going to start using the grading workflow just so we can get a little refresher course on how these different feature line elements work. And plus this parallel grading scenario is a little closer to how the native grading objects work inside Civil 3D in the first place. So here in my commercial site, I'm obviously working at the northeast corner of this intersection. All of these red feature lines represent the gutter line of my curb and gutter. I have this cyan feature line. This is going to be the high water level of my detention basin. I have a building pad in here at its finished floor elevation. And then I also have this squiggly line. This is what I'll eventually be using to tie in my proposed to my existing. But this is just kind of the general extents of where I'm actually doing grading in my file. So with this, let's go ahead and let us hop over to our ribbon, where we are going to find the CIM Project Suite ribbon tab. If you've already purchased the tools, or if you go and download a demo, show you where at the end of the webinar, you're going to see all of these pop in to that ribbon, and everything here is included. So no matter if you're just interested in AutoGrader or Pipe Designer or Label Genie, you get one tool, you get all of the tools. So I'm going to start out here by running AutoGrader, which is going to bring up my main dialog box. Now this is a webinar, so I have gone ahead and done a few things by hand. I've gone ahead and done a few things ahead of time. So for example, I already have a grading family defined for my detention basin and that safety shelf. But I am going to go through the process of building my curb and gutter for us all here by myself manually. So in this interface, we've got some options. You know, this is just basic where, if we're going to save and load, where's that going to live? Preferably on some sort of network location where we can all do that. Set a couple of defaults for your layering and your styles, so on and so forth. Over here on the right, this is where we're going to have the opportunity to create, delete, and modify our existing grading families, save them out, load them in, rearrange the order, and if we have a few small changes to make, we might even just copy an existing grading family. So I'll create the new. And like I said, this is going to be a parallel situation. And I'm going to name this, this will be my, I'm up in Minnesota, and so a common curb configuration we have is B612. It's going to be 6 inches high, and the flange area is going to be 12 inches wide from the gutter line to the edge of pavement. I'll call this B6 and 12 CG for curb gutter. Now my first question is going to be to define what these parent feature lines are going to be. So I actually have a drop down here. I'll run through and select by drawing first, and simply come in here and grab a couple of these parent feature lines. And that's fine. That's a perfectly acceptable way to do things for getting these set up and running on your project. However, if you do have some reasonably mature CAD standards, and if you have users who are willing to follow them, I'm going to suggest that you're going to get a lot more mileage by using filters in order to identify this information. So actually right now in this current version, these dialogues, these ellipses are supposed to go through and actually let you pick from the drawing. CTC is working on fixing that. So I'm going to have to simply type in here what I know those layers to be. Now, if I know the exact name of the layer, that's fine. Then it'll go through and it says, oh, hey, I got 6 feature lines. Let me move that kind of out of the way. Edit that again. It says, oh, hey, you've got those 6 feature lines. But you know, if we don't have everything written down right away, we can definitely use our asterisk wildcards, just like we're used to in the layer manager. And I can say asterisk curb gutter, asterisk, and I should, yep, I'm able to keep those same 6 in there. So that's how I'm choosing what my parent or the starting point is going to be. We'll talk about how we got the elevations for those in a little bit, but I did want to get this range in here first. Now that I have my parent, it's time to start defining some children, which is going to be over here with the plus button on the side. We'll always want to be proactive and consistent about naming our feature lines. So just double click in there, and this will be my top face. I'm going to anchor it to my parent. And then this is what I'm talking about when I say we're being proactive about solving our right triangle. So Just like the native grading object toolset, we have a variety of different methods we can use to define some known things and then let that variable get solved for. So for this 6-inch tall curb and gutter, I'm going to go with a distance to relative elevation. I'm going to go 2 inches over, so 0.167. And then I'm going to go 0.5 feet up. And yes, sign does matter. As soon as I get these parameters put in here, I'm going to see the bottom half of my grading family window start to populate with a little representation. Do note that this is schematic. It is not to scale, but it is going to at least show you how that relationship is going to work. Next up, I'm going to need a top back of curb feature line. So we'll go ahead and we'll create another child. This one we will call intuitively, or as top back. Now, I could re-anchor this to my parent, but I don't want to have to solve that math from there. I just want to keep running from my top face. So I'm going to make sure I choose the top face as my anchor for this one. And in this case, distance and slope, that works just fine because I'm going to have a 1/2 inch wide base and it's going to be flat. So 0% slope is going to work out great for that. But now, unlike, well, I mean, you can still do this with the grading object, but again, we're being proactive about all of this. Now, if I want to get to my flange or my edge of travel way over here, though, I need to create a new feature line, and I need to go to the other side of my parent. So this new feature line, we'll call this flange, lip, edge of travel way, whatever you like, works for you. But now I'm going to re-anchor this back to the parent. And I'm going to do this as a distance at slope. Again, this is a 12-inch wide curb. It's going to be 1 foot, and I think we're running at 6%, positive 6% for that spec. I could be wrong, but close enough. And then the key part here is I'm going to change my grading side from the right to the left. As soon as I do that, I can see my preview update. Again, not quite to scale, but definitely enough to show me what's going on. And I think I'm pretty good with how this is going to work. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to close this. And then now that I have that all set up, I'm going to hit the run button to actually get this grading family to create all of these feature lines in my drawing. Notice right now, though, I don't have a surface assigned. That's OK. We'll come back in here and we'll check out a couple other things. I can see these lines kind of puffing up a little bit. That's great. I'm going to now close out of AutoGrader, and we can zoom in a spell and kind of check out what's going on. So I can see that I have 2 feature lines on the inside. I have 1 resultant feature line on the outside. So I should have gotten my left and right correct when I put that in there. That looks good. So let's kind of skip that whole process where we manually add this to our surface. Let's get AutoGrader to do that for us. Hop back into the tool. And now I'm going to just kind of make this a little taller. I'm going to go find my B612 grading family. I'm going to choose my surface. I want that to go into my building site finish grade. And I want to go check these settings so that I have good brake line additive features. Always a great idea to add in a custom name when you're putting these together. So this is going to be CG primary brake lines. However, if you want, you can have your grading family put that in there too. Going to be standard brake lines. Proximity and non-destruct, those are all kind of silly and have pretty limited use in my experience. But for my supplementing, I'm going to dial this up to 10 linear and a 0.1 on the mid-ordinate. And these are definitely not too close, so I'm going to leave my weeding turned off. I'll say OK. And also, just to kind of prove that this stuff is here somewhat, I do have the building site finished grade surface. It does exist, and it is set to turn on. It just doesn't happen to have any definition. So for full transparency, just wanted to show that off. We'll head back into the tool. And now when I run AutoGrader, it's going to go through, it's going to refresh all of those old definitions. So the tool will actually go through to delete the feature lines that it knew it created. It won't override any manually created feature lines that you have created, but it'll go through in this refresh process, just does all of that stepped offsetting all over again, but it runs everything in the way that we've described. So now I can go select my surface, hop into Object Viewer, and confirm that not only do I have all of this flat stuff, but I've got these nice, clean vertical faces. I might want to turn up my mid-ordinate distance a little higher to get these small radius curves looking good. But if I would have gone through that all straight through without actually explaining everything, I could have had this done in 2 or 3 minutes for my entire site getting graded and my entire parking lot area getting graded. Now, I do want to talk a little bit more about how these how the gutter feature lines got their initial elevations, because we always want to make sure that our master feature line, or our parent feature line, rather, is designed ahead of time. So if I come grab over this, I can see, I've got maybe 0.2 of a foot of difference in elevation between my minimum and maximum across this feature line. My grades aren't too crazy, but I've got 1% here and there. But how did I get all these elevations? Well, I'm actually going to turn off my surface here. Set that to no display. And I'm going to turn on some other layers. Now, this is a concept that I go over in that Autodesk University class I mentioned back in the PowerPoint section. But we're going to use this concept of a setup grid surface. So what this is these are feature lines that live in their own site, and they are here to kind of define some of our basic parameters. When we're doing site grading, what we actually find is that usually the vertical behavior is pretty simple. We only really care about where the high points are, where the low points are, making sure that we have ADA access routes, so on and so forth. So I'm going to turn this to contours and triangles. Let's just go with 1 and 5 design. 0.2 and 1, how about that? So with this, we can see that I've actually got 2 low spots here in the middle of my curb. Now, this whole setup surface is put together for the express reason that my vertical behavior is pretty simple, but it is really, really annoying coming through here and using either your elevation editor or using your quick elevation edit command to go through and do your point-by-point grading. We have always been able to take elevations from a surface and apply them to a feature line. However, in Civil 3D 2018, we introduced the functionality so that our feature lines can be relative to that surface and maintain a dynamic link, maintain that dynamic connection. So if I actually pop into my elevation editor here on these feature lines, I'll notice that my gutter feature line is dynamically referencing the site setup grid surface, and it has that relative elevation over here. So now I have an elevation of 832.95 over here. If I change my setup surface will push those changes through to my gutter line feature line, and then AutoGrader, when I refresh that grading family, it will re-offset and re-establish those new grades based off of my gutter line feature line. So using this concept is a really great way to make sure that our drainage is going to happen and we don't have to mess with all of the complicated horizontal point-by-point grading. Again, if you want to have some more information about that, go check out either my Autodesk University class, just search Kyle Groves, look for feature lines. Also, Brian Lewandowski, he is the Civil Product Manager over at CTC, the company who makes these tools. He's done this format in various conferences and things as well, including AU too. So what I'm going to do here is I'll turn off that setup surface. I'll leave the feature lines on. I'll turn my building site FG surface back on. Got the 1 and 5 design. We can kind of see, okay, there's some low spots, some high spots. I'll make this really, really drastic, but I'll change the elevation of my setup surface by using my feature line elevation edit. I'm going to confirm that I'm in the right site here. So it's 832.95. I'm going to make this really, really obvious. I'll go 802.95. $803.95, 803.18. So I should now expect to see some pretty drastic elevation changes over there. I should expect that my feature line for my gutter, since it's dynamically referencing that surface, I can see that my elevations are now much smaller. I've got that 803 and 810 range, whereas before I was in the 830s. So that concept has been proven. What I'm going to do now is I'm simply going to run AutoGrader, and I'm going to rerun that curb and gutter grading family. It's going to update my feature lines. It's going to update my surface. I can definitely see that those contours got changed in macro, but when we go and we check out our object viewer, the bends are kind of weird, and I'm not trying to say this is a good design. I'm just trying to prove the concept that all of my curb and gutter, those stepped offsets, everything else have been refreshed, and they're now reading that new data. So where the grading object in native Civil 3D will do that automatically and dynamically for you, that I think, in my opinion, is kind of part of the problem for why it can be so unstable. With AutoGrader, we do need to manually run that refresh, but by manually running that refresh and being prescriptive about how those offsets are going to happen, that's how we're going to make a more stable result happen. Also, something else that, even if you do like the grading object tool, even if you do like building those on the fly, one thing that won't do is it won't do this on all of your feature lines at the same time. AutoGrader will go through, and it did 6 rounds of these because it's found 6 iterations of my gutter feature line. So with that, kind of cap off that portion of the presentation, let's look at some of these other grading families that we can use in the parallel scenario. Now, I'm not going to go through the process of rebuilding all of them because I did say I wanted to keep this to about 45 minutes, and it's about time to move on to the parallel grading. So our building site pond, this is going to be pretty straightforward. We have a parent feature line. We have 3 children, and they're all being offset, in this case, not left or right, but when we have something that's closed, we also have the opportunity to define whether or not we're offsetting inward or outward for that tool. We'll just go ahead and cancel that. And I'm going to individually run my building site pond. We'll see that automatically added to it. And then we'll get our site grading limits. This is going to be taking advantage of the daylight functionality that we're all so fond of, regardless of how we feel about the grading object tool. We all like the fact that it daylights really nice and cleanly. So when we're doing this with AutoGrader, we're to make sure that that last feature line is running either a distance or a slope to a surface. We're going to define that slope, and we need to define our target surface. And then the settings dialog does give us that option to define how often we're going to calculate that. This is basically our tessellation spacing from the out-of-the-box tool set for the grading object. But how far are we going to calculate this along a linear object? How far are we going to calculate this along a curved segment? Cancel that. I'll go ahead and I will run my site building grading limits, and we'll see everything pop up here to the side. Now, one thing I will just kind of mention as, oh, hold on. Didn't want to run those all quite yet. And actually, folks, I'll just go ahead and say that if I have your time and your attention, we're probably going to go close to 1 o'clock as opposed to 12:45 today, or rather for a full hour webinar for those watching this in posterity. Now, if you don't like anything that AutoGrader came up with, it is all doing these as a function of just what's happening inside that tool. So if I go into my undo time machine, or if I just hit undo a couple of times, everything that just happened in AutoGrader is going to be treated as one operation for my undo time machine. So we should see a lot of this walk itself back such that we're just in the parking lot now. So I wanted to individually run my building site pond, and I wanted to individually run my building site grading limits. So the addition of these feature lines to our surface is pretty great, although I will say there's one thing that no matter what we're doing, other than using the grading object, we are always going to have to come through and modify our boundary so that we can cut off these tin lines around interior corners. Just note that you're always going to see those whenever you're doing this with AutoGrader or whenever you're doing this with manual stepped offsets and the rest of that jazz. You will need to come in with your boundaries and just chop off those interior curves with your feature lines or with your outside boundary. So with that, that kind of concludes what I wanted to talk about with my site grading workflows. If you have them, feel free to go ahead and ask questions, type them into the window through the Q&A interface. I am going to move on to the site grading portion of this demo now, but definitely get those questions in. I'll see if I can get them answered now, and I'll definitely get to them at the end of the presentation. So for our perpendicular grading workflow, this is where we're talking about or in a subdivision, this is generally where I'm talking about for running that perpendicular scenario. So I do have kind of this same subdivision. You'll see it in various demonstrations by ATG and by CTC when we're doing our webinars. But basically, I've got this subdivision. I've already gone through. I've done my platting. I've understood, like, okay, here's all my side lot lines. This is how this is all going to work. So I'm just going to take all of these polylines. I'm going to copy them with a base point. I'm going to paste them into my grading file. I could definitely do like an XREF binding or a promotion or whatever else, nested copy. Since there are so many of them, I'm just going to bring them in this way. Now I am going to not deal with these guys on the east half of the site. We'll figure those out later. And I'm also going to turn on one other piece of pre-graded magic, which are these back lot lines representing my interior side. So what we have in this file is I've got a series of these red feature lines. These are our right-of-way feature lines. We would have these as being extracted feature lines out of our corridor. Once our corridor gets to its edge, we can dynamically extract that feature line. And with that feature line, we can treat it just like any other stepped offsets, styles, hierarchy, rest of that stuff. And since I missed it in the site grading workflow, I am going to talk about this one little setting that I mentioned people don't really know that much about. So and it's a setting that lives in Prospector, which might contribute to it. So if you go look at a particular site and it's got some feature lines, you can go into the properties of that site for the feature lines, go into the options tab, and there's this whole concept of a feature line crossing split point resolution. Basically, what this means is that whenever you have two feature lines that live in the same site, if they cross, they have to share an elevation. All else held equal, including if the styles are the same, the last one that was edited is the one that's going to control that elevation when they cross. However, this list actually is a hierarchy. Notice how we can move things up and down. So what this says is whenever I have a parent style feature line and a child style feature line, whenever they cross or whenever they touch each other, the parent is always going to maintain its elevation. So in our site grading workflow, this is places where we can define an ADA ramp. This is places where we can define the site grid lines or our gutter lines. Things that have more importance are going to get this higher style because we don't want to accidentally overwrite them. Other feature lines, maybe we're just adding these for extra tin definition, or we want some more labels put down in our drawing. These tertiaries are basically going to function as read only. But you'll definitely want to take a look at your template's feature line styles. If they're not there already, you might want to create like a ABC, primary, secondary, tertiary type deal. And then you can apply that to all of your sites, and that'll function for your template. And this matters because I'm going to have a couple of different of those relationships that I'm taking advantage of now. Mainly, the fact that at the edge of our subdivision, this is our elevation from our existing. So eventually we do have to tie back into our existing. My existing feature line style is at the top of this hierarchy. So whenever my new lot lines are going to cross it, where they overlap, they're going to take on that elevation. Also, my parent style is at a higher hierarchy than my side lot line is, or rather that my child feature line is. So now I'm going to go through and I'm going to manually convert feature lines from all of these polyline objects. Use a little lasso selection here. Oh, that's a hole. Should work. I'm going to be proactive, going to make sure that these are all getting assigned to the child style, and I want to make sure they're in the right site so that they can interact with that hierarchy based off of my other stuff. So it's going to be in the subdivision site. I will erase existing, but I don't need to worry about assigning my elevations. Oh, this is not going the layer that I wanted. I'm going to move those real quick here to side lot lines. That's the layer I'm looking for. No, I want lot lines, regular lot lines, green. So what I have is I have the highest style here on my back existing. That's always going to control the elevation. I have my parent style for my right of way. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to modify my grading family to start from my right of way, go outward, and then it's just going to touch these other ones and take on that existing elevation. So here, go ahead and run AutoGrader. Now I'm going to look at my subdivision existing lots. Again, if we're going to create this from scratch, we just need to make sure we press the plus button and choose the perpendicular grading style. I'm just going to edit this one because it's already set up here. And what I have is about 90 feet worth of grading that I'm being prescriptive about. So we're going to go up at 5% for 40 feet. We're going to go down 2 feet over 20. We'll do that twice. And then we'll just have our little walkout grading pad behind the house for 10 feet at -4%. Notice though, this comes to a number of 90 feet, and I'm going to have much more than that elsewhere. That's okay. For my parent feature lines, again, I want to make sure, not necessarily that I'm specifying this by selection, rather I want to make sure I'm being proactive about my layer filter. So in this case, that's the right of way grade existing. So I will, by filter, great. It's going to get those all selected. Oh, you know what? I actually do want to be specific because I'm going to do something else fancy for this east side. So I had that right in the first place. So those 4 feature lines. And now, this is the difference between what I'm doing over here on the west half with these green ones that I made beforehand versus the east half where I'm going to have the tool make them for me completely. So when I say grade existing, what I'm doing is I'm going to be filtering these for the layer that I'm looking for, that lot lines layer. Now these actually can be polylines. However, right now the tool is having a little bit of trouble getting that done right. And it's a pretty small ask by the user to manually convert those ahead of time. So it's going to tell me, hey, this is how many I have. I have an opportunity to define my settings. So when we're measuring this distance, are we measuring it from basically perpendicular to or parallel to the parent feature line? So if there's any curvature to these, we can define that as along the child or normal to the parent. Formatting, we skipped this earlier in the parallel stuff. Same dialogue, same choices. What's your style? What's your layer? What's your site for all of those child feature lines? Why are you yelling at me? So I'm starting from my right of way. I'm grading perpendicular to and away from it. For the first 90 feet, I'm going to tell my feature lines that I want them to behave like this. And then after that 90 feet is up, they're going to intersect with other feature lines at a higher hierarchy. So those are going to get created. Now, one other thing that's pretty cool, we'll call that the walkout, is I can also choose to have feature lines get created that are also parallel, that are going to go through and connect the dots between these various points that I have slated. So I'm going to go ahead and save and close this, confirm these are going to get added to my FG surface with good settings. And I'm just going to run this family. It's a lot of feature lines that it's going to run through, so it might take a second. Although it's not a whole lot to ask out of these wonderful BIMbox laptops that ATG is also working with most of the time. So this was my parallel one from my backlot. I can see that I had a couple of things not quite draw correctly. So I'm actually, and because that's a really big line and a lot of curves and stuff, so I'm gonna go through, I don't have to redo anything. I simply need to go back into that edit family. I'm gonna deselect that box and update the family to run. It's gonna know, hey, just go ahead and recreate those, make sure that other line doesn't get added in. Object viewer. And we'll come back to that east half, but out here, you know, I've got a cul-de-sac that definitely looks like a cul-de-sac, and I've got all of these varying slopes over here. So if I kind of check this out, this is my all right. Object viewer can be a little tricky sometimes. So this is my right of way. I'm going up for 40 feet, going down for 20 feet twice. I've got my backyard building pad that's 10 feet. And then from here, the rest of this is all floating because again, I'm taking my elevation from my existing surface and that feature line hierarchy out there in the back. So in a matter of minutes, I am capable of creating all of the preliminary grading for my entire subdivision, just based off of those things. If I'm using the parcel toolset or if I'm using the polyline toolset to get these lots laid out in the first place, it's very easy for me to take those polylines from that geometry, convert those into my feature lines, and that's all gonna work. Now, if I have a situation, let's go ahead and now look at the east half of our site. I have this situation where I do have a feature line that I'm a master to. I do want to have a perpendicular grading to it. We can actually define how often we want these feature lines to be graded. So basically that's the difference in this presentation between the existing lots. That just meant I had a feature line. It can have arbitrary definitions, but it should connect everywhere it's supposed to connect. It should have a style associated with it that we want. The new lots, this is where I'm going to go through and I'm going to define how often I want those to get put in. So I'll edit this grading family now. My big choice here is for the perpendicular family. I'm going to create and grade new. I'm choosing my station value. So every 60 feet, that's how often it's going to get put in here. And that's how that's going to work. I'm choosing to offset to the right side or to the left side. Do remember, feature lines do have stationing. So we got to be paying attention to that. Check our formats, what style we want, what layer we want those to go on. And then this should be ready to run. So now I have all these brand new feature lines, and I can see a couple of spots where they're making the surface break for us. It even went through, because I had that much cleaner straight scenario, that parallel feature line got created to connect all of those dots. And again, everything was added to my surface, so I can simply pop this into Object Viewer. And again, we're starting from our right of way here in green. We're going up for a certain distance. We're going down, and then we have a backyard lot over here. So all of those break lines are getting created, and those break lines are getting added into our surface with just the right stuff. Now, the one thing I will say is these back lot lines here on the inside, back by the cul-de-sac and the rest of that stuff, this is something that I went through and graded manually. So that is something you're gonna have to pay attention to, because as I mentioned before, this is the first 90 feet of those feature line. This is the last 60 feet to get up to 50 feet to get to that full 140-foot distance. So whatever this back feature line is set to, that's going to inform the elevation of this point right here, and then this slope is allowed to float. So with that, folks, that was what I wanted to show off inside Civil 3D. What did we learn here today? Well, we learned that AutoGrader from CTC can automate the creation, the population, and the formatting of your Civil 3D feature lines inside your drawing. Also, AutoGrader lets us reuse common grading criteria on multiple projects by allowing users to save and load their grading families, which reminds me that I should talk about that. Pretty straightforward. If you launch the AutoGrader tool, you have the opportunity to take an existing site family, you can save it out, you can load it. Your options for the tool define where that file path lives. So you should probably set this to somewhere on your server where everybody from your company can find it. And then simply running the save icon will allow you to save this out as a file. Running the open icon will allow you to go find that and bring it back into your project. Again, because we're going to be using common things over and over again, that's why I do recommend think about how your standards exist and think if there's a way that you can get these to set up by a filter. Now today I just used inclusive filtering on the layer, but we have layer description, we have name, we have style, and we have sites, not only to include, but also to exclude from our selection set. So really, really powerful, discrete ways to get exactly the information that we're looking for. Oh, my mistake, I saved this for my Label Genie presentation previously. The AutoGrader tool will be able to create and modify those family and those families, the parents and the child feature lines perpendicular to or parallel to those parent feature lines. And for those of us that were not aware, AutoGrader is part of the CIM Project Suite that's created by CTC Software, resold in the United States by ATG. This is just one of the many time-saving tools available in that suite. You can find a trial at the ATG website under the products dropdown, or at CTC's website, ctcsoftware.com, again, the product dropdown for the CIM Project Suite. With that, I do also want to remind folks that you can stay in touch with ATG on social media. We are on both LinkedIn and on YouTube. Also, CTC's YouTube page is really great for just kind of the fundamental learning of these. At ATG, we're generally interested in incorporating this in other workflows and doing some more of that. But folks, I do want to say thank you so much for your time today. My name is Kyle Groves. I'm with ATG USA, and I hope that you were able to find something helpful.